This lecture covers foreclosing on security. So if a borrower misses payments, the bank threatens something called a foreclosure. Well, what are the buyer's rights before a foreclosure sale? The buyer's rights are reinstatement or equitable redemption. Reinstatement allows for the buyer to avoid foreclosure by paying all of their missing payments before the lender accelerates the loan. Remember, we said that acceleration means that the total amount that is due on the loan becomes due immediately. So some states even allow for buyers to reinstate after the acceleration period has begun. Okay. So reinstatement, as a general rule, allows buyers to avoid foreclosure by paying the missed payments. Equitable redemption is something that all states have. It allows the borrower to avoid foreclosure by paying the loan off in full, plus any accrued interest or costs. And so if the buyer defaults on a payment, they can pay the full amount that is due on the loan before the foreclosure sale, and the foreclosure is avoided. But if the buyer fails to use one of these remedies, then the home can be sold at what is called a foreclosure sale or a foreclosure auction. So there are two types of foreclosure sales. One is the judicial foreclosure, and we said that you see judicial foreclosures typically where you have mortgages. Judicial foreclosures are a specific type of litigation in which the lender files a complaint against the borrower and any junior lieners or anyone else holding any interest or encumbrance on the property. It's very important that the lender names all junior interests, because if they don't name them as defendants, then that interest will not be wiped out by the foreclosure. So after process is served and the defendants may file an answer to raise any issues that they might have with the foreclosure, then the lender typically obtains a judgment that authorizes foreclosure. Once the lender gets this judgment, they can then set the date and time for the foreclosure sale, and an auction is usually conducted, and the lender actually usually bids on the property. They bid using what is called a credit bid, which means they can bid for the remaining loan balance that is owed to them without having to come up with any money. Any other lien holders, they have to come up with cash to bid, or if there is a third party that wants to bid on the property, they typically bid in cash. Then once the price is agreed upon, the highest bidder wins. Then the final step is judicial confirmation of the sale. Courts usually confirm the foreclosure sale, but a court can refuse to confirm if they feel that the purchase price was extremely low, or there were some other issues with the sale, like the seller didn't publicize the sale, etc. Okay, the second type of foreclosure is called a non-judicial foreclosure, and we see non-judicial foreclosures when we have deeds of trusts, right? Non-judicial foreclosures do not involve the courts. This is where the lender, typically it's the trustee, right? Because we're usually in a deed of trust state. They give notice of the sale, and They give the notice to the borrower, the junior lieners, or anybody else holding interest, and they conduct the sale by an auctioneer, similar to what's done with a judicial foreclosure. And here again, we have bidders, and the highest bidder wins. Right? Same rules as before. The lender can use a credit bid. Everybody else has to bring in cash. So once the property is sold, then the auctioneer delivers a quit claim deed to the successful bidder. That's recorded. And so that takes the place of a judicial confirmation. So here again, whereas with the judicial foreclosure, the primary lender, had to name any junior lien holders as defendants. For non-judicial foreclosures, the primary lender, needs to give proper notice to all the junior lien holders. If proper notice is not served, then again, the junior lien holder's interest is not wiped out by the foreclosure sale. So what do I mean by wiped out? Well, you may recall last chapter we talked about recording, and we talked about order of priorities. Well, we use a similar process when we talk about obligations that are secured by the land. So generally the lender, that is first in time, so we have the lender, they're going to have priority over all of the other liens on the property. So let's say the U.S. Bank is the lender, and they give the buyer a deed of trust on the property. They finance the property. They have priority over all subsequent liens. So let's say that buyer B gets this loan to purchase the property, right, from U.S. Bank. Then buyer B decides they want to renovate the kitchen. So they take out a second secured loan against the house for the reno, and that is from Wells Fargo. And then let's say they have contracted with somebody to do work on the property, and that person doesn't get paid, and they file what's called a mechanic's lien on the property. So this would be the order of priority of the different loans. So what happens if after foreclosure? Well, if U.S. Bank, let's say we're in a deed of trust state and it's a non-judicial foreclosure. So as long as U.S. Bank properly notices Wells Fargo and they properly notice this mechanic, then at foreclosure, all of these liens are wiped out. So foreclosure eliminates or wipes out this lien and all other liens that come after it. But it does not, foreclosures don't wipe out two types of liens: subsequent bona fide purchasers, or any party that might take under the shelter rule. Foreclosures also don't wipe out any senior security interest. So what do I mean by senior security interest? Well, let's say it is U.S. Bank that's foreclosing on the property. Their The foreclosure would wipe out U.S. Bank's interest and all these interests below it. But if there was an interest above it, let's say that the buyer, before they took out the loan from U.S. Bank, they had taken out a loan from Citibank, right? And that loan was first in time. U.S. Bank's foreclosure can only wipe out all the subsequent interest as well as U.S. Bank's interest. So again, we said if U.S. Bank fails to provide notice, let's say for the mechanics lien, then the mechanics lien is not wiped out. All right, so how does the bona fide purchaser rule fit in this type of scenario? Okay, so let's say buyer decides to take a loan, a personal loan from somebody to do work on the property that's secured by that loan. So buyer B wants to renovate the master bathroom, and they take out a personal loan from A, and it's secured with the property, with the land, right? Let's then say that A forgets to record this interest. All right. Then buyer A purchases from buyer B. They are a subsequent bona fide purchaser. They will take property without that is not subject to this lien because this security interest here has not been recorded. They are considered a subsequent bona fide purchaser because they didn't have notice, actual notice of this lien, right? Actual or constructive notice. So they can be a subsequent bona fide purchaser. Therefore, buyer A's title would have priority over A's security interest. We'll go over more of these when we talk about the examples. But before we do that, I want to talk about the second principle that is accomplished by mortgages, and that is that some of the liens may be satisfied. So let's say we have a foreclosure sale. The property is sold for $280,000, and the mortgage, what is left on the mortgage is $100,000. And then there is a second mortgage that was taken out on the house, and that was for $200,000. All right, so if the property is sold for $280,000 at the foreclosure sale, then how is that $280,000 distributed? Well, first, it goes to satisfy this $100K. Okay, so that leaves us with $180,000. Then it goes to the subsequent lien holders in order. So here we go. The next is for the second mortgage for $200,000. Well, we don't have enough to pay for the $200,000, so this $180,000 goes to this second mortgage holder here. What is left is $20,000, but remember, foreclosures are going to wipe out that $20,000 because it wipes out all the liens on the property. So the second mortgagee is not going to get the rest of their money. Now, in some states, this second mortgagee would be allowed to go after the buyer for this $20,000 in court. Now, typically, they wouldn't be able to satisfy that judgment because the buyer isn't making payments on their house, usually because they have financial difficulties. Also, many states have enacted legislation that prohibits the lien holders from going after the buyer for this money that is left over here. And if it is for a home, right? So it's the protection for people, whatever is still owed is, in a sense, wiped out by the foreclosure. And the second mortgager cannot go after the buyer in these states. They're protected. All right, so let's do another scenario. What happens if instead the first mortgage on the house is only for $50,000 and the second mortgage is only $20,000? Okay. Well, again, here we're going to start off by satisfying the first mortgage. Right, we have 230, and then we have enough to satisfy the second mortgage, and that leaves 210. So where does that 210 go? That is distributed to the buyer, right? The buyer will take the rest of the proceeds. Let's use some examples from your book to help solidify some of these concepts. So if you'd like to follow along, please turn to page 666. Let's look at the first example in the blue box on page 666. It says, suppose O's home is encumbered by 3 mortgages. The first priority mortgage is held by L1, and it secures a $270,000 loan. A second priority mortgage is held by L2, and it secures a $30,000 loan. And a third priority mortgage is held by L3, securing a $20,000 loan. If L1 forecloses on the mortgage, this eliminates this mortgage and all junior mortgages. Okay. And so whoever purchases the property at the foreclosure sale, the purchaser, the buyer at the foreclosure sale, will take the title free and clear from all of these encumbrances, regardless of the actual purchase price settled on. Okay, so that's why foreclosures are important. Let's look at the second example. So let's suppose instead of having L foreclose, we have, or L1, we have L2 foreclosing. So if we have L2 foreclosing on the mortgage, then the foreclosure sale would eliminate L2's lien and L3's lien, but it does not affect L1. So any purchaser at a foreclosure sale that is instituted by L2 will take subject to L1's mortgage. Move on to the next page, 667. Let's take a look at the example in the blue box, starting with the first one. So suppose that L1, so we're going to go back to the fact pattern before, so let me write that down. Okay, so here are the numbers from the previous example that we're going to continue with. So suppose, again, that L1 is foreclosing. The highest bidder at the sale pays $305,000. So we're able to satisfy this first mortgage, and that leaves us with $35K only. So we're then able to satisfy the second mortgage, but that only leaves us with $5,000 left. So that $5,000 will go to L3, and even though L3's interest is not completely paid off, the purchaser at the auction that paid the 305, they take free and clear. They take title free and clear of even L3's interest. All right, suppose instead that L2 forecloses here, and the buyer at the foreclosure sale pays $60,000. So first we satisfy lender two's loan, and that leaves us with $30,000. So we satisfy lender three's loan, that leaves us with $10,000. So where does that $10,000 go? Well, that $10,000 goes to the owner, the previous owner of the property, because they get the surplus, right? Now, L1, you'll notice here, it didn't receive any payments. And that is because, remember, the foreclosure only affects the current loan and any junior loan. It does not affect senior loans. So here the buyer takes subject to L1's loan. Well, what does that mean? Well, remember back to when we talked about assuming versus taking subject to. We said if someone takes subject to a loan, that means that if the maker of this loan, which is the owner here, defaults on the loan, then L1 can still foreclose on the property. And the buyer is taking that risk. So the buyer has title, right? The buyer can take possession of the property, but they can lose their interest in the property because they took subject to this loan here. Now, they're not assuming that loan, so that means that they're not personally liable for it, but the property is still securing that loan. And so they're taking the risk of that property being taken away from them. Let's keep going down to the second blue box on that page. Let's start with hypothetical number 1. And here we're going to try to determine what is the state of title after foreclosure and who gets the sales proceeds. All right, so I put the 2 questions up here. We're going to answer these 2 questions for each one of the hypotheticals. So starting with number 1. O's farm is encumbered by 3 mortgages. L1 holds the first mortgage for $100,000. L2 holds the second mortgage for $50,000. And L3 holds the third mortgage for $75,000. L1 forecloses. At the foreclosure sale, B buys the land for $110,000. So now we're going to answer what is the state of the title and who gets the sales proceeds. Well, the state of the title would be that B is able to take the title free and clear. And he gets to take the title free and clear because L1 is foreclosing, and that wipes out L1's interest and all junior lien holders. So that means the title is free and clear. All right, so who gets what sale proceeds? Well, $100,000 is going to go to lender one. That leaves us only with $10,000 left. So that $10,000 is going to go to lender two. That'll leave $40,000 and $75,000 that is owed by owner. So each of these lenders, if the jurisdiction allows, can go after O to satisfy the remaining amounts. But B takes the title free and clear, so B is not on the hook for anything. All right, let's do the next problem. So problem number 2. O's house is encumbered by 2 mortgages. L1 holds the first mortgage for $300,000. L2 holds the second mortgage for $150,000. L2 forecloses on the property. B buys the house at auction for $200,000. First, let's start with what is the state of the title. Well, since L2 foreclosed, that means L2's mortgage is wiped out. However, it doesn't affect L1's senior interest for $300,000. So that means B takes subject to L1's interest. Okay. All right. So O has to continue paying to L1 until this amount is satisfied. If O does not, then L1 can foreclose on the property, even though it's now owned by B. So B is taking subject to L1's $300,000. So now on to the second question. Who gets the sale proceeds? Well, we are going to first satisfy the party that has foreclosed. They take $150,000. That leaves $50K. Where does that $50K now go? Well, that $50K is going to go to the owner, right? Because any surplus goes to the owner. All right, problem number 3. So O's factory is encumbered by 2 mortgages and an easement. L1 holds the first mortgage for $500,000. L2 holds the second mortgage for $700,000. And N holds an easement over O's factory land, which is junior to both mortgages. L1 forecloses on the $500,000. B buys the factory for $500,000. Going to go a little out of order here. L1 gets the proceeds, and L2 will have to go after the owner for what's called a deficiency judgment if the jurisdiction allows. But what is the state of the title? Well, L1, that mortgage is wiped out. This mortgage is wiped out, and the easement is wiped out too. So all encumbrances are wiped out by a senior lien. Continue on in our next video.